Dankie Kongres, dan gaan ons vir Corneil Lou vra, die fasiliteerder van hierdie paneelbespreking. Corneil, sal jy vir ons dan die paneel voorstel? Dankie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Afternoon, Congress. I think we definitely chose the best topic to keep everyone awake after lunch. So I think it's going to be nice and interactive. We've got a voice recording that would identify all the panel members, so we can go ahead with that.
The Fertilizer panel members are, representing Grain SA, André Kirsten, Executive Member. Industrial Development Corporation, Gampi Bapela, Head Agro Processing and Agriculture. Foscor, Julian Pilliam, Chief Financial Officer. Department of Trade, Industry and Commerce, Nkumisa Mtalisa, Chief Director in the Agro Processing Unit. Omnia Fertilizer, Louis Strydom, Marketing Director. Sasol, Johannes Lou, Vice President, Planning and Optimization.
Thank you, Congress. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, panelists. We've got a good mixture of fertilizer companies on the panel, as well as government institutions that support our industry. We're going to start with André Kirsten, our chairperson of the Production Input Working Group, giving us the platform to lay the discussion. I think we've got big steps to follow in. The question that was posed to the panel was, can the fertilizer cost structure be more cost effective for our local grain producers? So we have this nice balance between government and fertilizer companies, as I said. Just as an introduction, I think we've seen fertilizer prices increased to record levels. We're currently at levels where we haven't seen it before. So, and I think the Russian-Ukraine war, if we can call it that, has even made it worse. So without further ado, I would like to ask André Kirsten just to lay the table for us for the panel discussion.
Voorsitter, hier agter ons, mede-paneellede, afgevaardigdes en gaste. Josef, jy het net gesê jou Engels gaan opraak. Myne het opgeraak van heeltyd Engels luister. So ek gaan dit in Afrikaans doen. So die wat die Afrikaans verstaan nie, vat maar die vertaaldienste. As ons net ek wil net vir julle 'n bietjie inligting gee. Ek dink ons is altyd almal bewus van wat aangaan met die kunsmisbedryf in ons land hier. En kunsmis maak 'n baie groot deel van graanboere se insette uit. Dit kan enige iets tussen 25 tot 50% van jou insetkostes wees. So dit is 'n baie belangrike, kom ons sê maar, kommoditeit of 'n produk wat ons as boere gebruik. En soos Corneil gesê het, is die pryse besig om heeltemal weg te hardloop. Corneil, kan ons miskien daai eerste jy sien die goed pas nie op ons boere se koppe nie. Corneil wil nie aankom nie.
Kan ons die klikker maak werk asseblief?
As dit so okay, Corneil, gaan maar nog een aan. Nog een. As ons nou daar kyk, dit is min of meer die kunsmisverbruik wat in Suid-Afrika aan is. En as julle kyk dat die graanindustrie maak 65% van die kunsmisverbruik in Suid-Afrika maak dit uit. So ons is ook dan die, kom ons sê maar die afdeling in die landbou, wat die meeste afhanklik van kunsmis is en die meeste verbruik in ons land. As jy kyk, ons is in Suid-Afrika, as jy nou kyk na daai grafiek, hoe het ons die afgelope tyd het invoere gegroei in Suid-Afrika? Soos ons het laas jaar oor die 2.2 miljoen ton ingevoer en ons verbruik in Suid-Afrika net 2.2 miljoen ton kunsmis. Maar as moet onthou, daar is sekere kunsmis wat oor ons grense ook na die buurstate toe uitgevoer word. So, maar ons het fisies meer kunsmis ingevoer laas jaar. Dit wys hoe afhanklik ons is van invoere, hoe afhanklik ons is van ordentlike werkende hawens, wat ook 'n groot probleem is, en dan die infrastruktuur van transport van kunsmis reg oor die land, hoe afhanklik ons ook daarvan is. En as die snaakse goed in die wêreld gaan gebeur, en ek dink die paneel gaan daarby uitkom, kan julle sien wat 'n effek gaan kunsmis op ons hê, en ons weet almal dat ons as produsente kan nie sonder kunsmis voortgaan nie. So daar kan julle sien hoe ons gegroei het. As julle kyk, en ek is baie spyt dat Foskor nie vandag hier is nie, dat ons het laas jaar amper 300.000 ton MAP ingevoer. Ons, as ons net by fosfaat gaan stil staan, Foskor het 'n kapasiteit van 2.6 miljoen ton rotsfosfaat. Hulle kapasiteit, as hulle op vol kapasiteit is, kan hulle 690 miljoen ton fosforsuur maak, en hulle kan 400.000 ton MAP maak. Die gegevens wat ek gekry het is, fosfor het laas jaar 195.000 ton MAP gemaak. So ons sit met 'n strategiese bate, of dit is veronderstel om 'n strategiese bate in ons land te wees. En op die oomblik is dit een van die kunsmiskommoditeite wat ons erg knyp. En ons kan nie die voordeel kry van waar ons met een van die beste fosfaatbronne in die land sit, kan ons nie dit gebruik nie. So dit is, ek hoop ons gaan daarby ook 'n paar antwoorde kry vandag. Net om vir julle in te lig, as julle kyk na die tabel, dan is Suid-Afrika die tweede duurste land in die wêreld wat stikstofbron aanbetref. So jou stikstof wat jy hier het, is die tweede duurste in die land. Dis net Japan, dink ek, daar op die einde. Hulle moet alles heeltemal invoer. So net om vir julle te wys dat ons per kilogram stikstof redelik betaal teen die res van die wêreld. As ons kyk na fosfaat, is ons die vierde duurste. Ons sit met Foskor in ons land, en ons is tog vierde duurste in die wêreld wat fosfaat aanbetref. So, hierso sit iets wat ons sal moet aanwerk en te probeer daar kry. Net as ek nog vir julle ook kan sê, nou maak ek my eie goed toe. Volgens BIFAP is Suid-Afrika die derde duurste land wat kunsmis aanbetref. Die kostes wat ons vir kunsmis betaal is die derde duurste in die wêreld. So ja, dit is 'n probleem vir ons almal. En ek hoop die paneel, ek het net so vir julle 'n bietjie inligting gegee, dat die paneel vir julle van hierdie goed kan vir ons sê en vir ons van die probleme kan uitlig. Baie dankie.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you for setting the scene, Chairperson, Andre, panelists. To summarize, I think the challenge we have in South Africa, as you've seen, is the increased dependency on imports for fertilizer. That what makes it worse is fertilizer is between 30 and 50% of our producers' variable production cost. So it's kind of critical for us to be sustainable going forward and profitable over the long term. So as we said, as Andre said, unfortunately we can't have Foscor as part of the panel. We wanted to have Foscor part of the panel. Unfortunately, Julian Pallium, that's their CFO, has been appointed yesterday as their CEO. Rian Rademan has been appointed at Sasol. So Foscor unfortunately made apologies. But just to add on what Andre said, we've got a challenge in South Africa. We are importing currently more than we use ourselves. We've seen in times like COVID that being so dependent on imports puts a massive risk to the value chain. We were so fortunate to have a very robust input industry. We never spoken about input security, but suddenly it's on our tongues. So the one thing I want to add is we know we don't have any potassium in South Africa. So I think we can tick that one off. We have to import our potassium needs. For that we need our harvest to be streamlined and our transport. But for nitrogen and especially phosphates, we need to be able to be more dependent. As economists, we see it frequently. If you more self-dependent over long run, you are the best priced, the best cost for your own industry. So Dr. Johannes Louw is from Sasol, and I think it would be good to start maybe at the nitrogen part of fertilizer, because we believe it's the start of the nitrogen of the fertilizer chain. And we know Sasol, through the manufacturing of ammonia, is the main and sole manufacturer there. So Johannes, can you maybe just tell us where does the ammonia chain or the nitrogen chain start? Where's maybe the low-hanging fruit? What can we do to improve our dependence on imports, or are we at a dead end?
Thank you, Corneille. Chairperson, Congress, good afternoon. Thanks also for the opportunity to be here. Allow me to briefly, on behalf of Sasol, just to express also our appreciation of Grain SA and its members and the larger agricultural community for your support of Sasol products. Many of that beyond fertilizers, of course, also. So Sasol's role in the fertilizer industry is currently essentially just in the nitrogen value chain. And I will give a few perspectives in that respect. If some of this is old news to many of you, please bear with me. So ammonia is the basic feedstock that gets used to manufacture virtually all nitrogen fertilizers, whether it's urea, whether it's ammonium nitrate-based fertilizers like LAN and others. And even the ammonium sulfate, the nitrogen component in phosphate fertilizers like MAP, that's also derived from ammonia. So globally, ammonia is the feedstock commodity that drives manufacturing cost and prices. Sasol is still, as Corneille mentioned, the only manufacturer of ammonia in Southern Africa. Unfortunately, there's no urea capacity. In spite of us maximizing our ammonia capacity to the best of our ability, as we've always done, there is a growing shortage in ammonia. I think one of the graphs that Andre showed, pointed out that as much as 200,000 tons of ammonia got imported. You can compare that with, in the order of 600,000 tons that's manufactured by Sasol. And obviously, the million tons of urea that gets imported is really what, I guess, drives the local nitrogen industry to a large extent. In South Africa, the majority of the ammonia, whether Sasol produce it or whether it's imported, is then converted to ammonium nitrate. And it's important to also understand that ammonium nitrate is then used to manufacture either fertilizers or mining explosives. So there is a trade-off there. Let me then just also briefly reflect on where and how we produce ammonia. That is now Sasol. So roughly 50% of our ammonia is produced in Sasolburg, where the feed is natural gas, which we pipe from Mozambique. And the other 50% is produced in Secunda from coal gasification. Now, as much as I would have loved to give just good news here, I think the reality is that there's probably more risks than tailwinds generally for ammonia and nitrogen manufacturing locally. If I talk firstly, as far as gas-based production is concerned, we are bringing the gas from southern Mozambique, and we are doing everything we can to continue to exploration there. We've also got projects to lengthen the life of our reserve there. But ultimately, if there's not other more economical reserves becoming available, the feedstock will become increasingly a challenge. If you ask what would be the alternative to gas that currently comes from Mozambique, LNG or liquid nitrogen gas is certainly a readily available option, and Sasol is in discussion with international entities on potentially at a later stage using that as a complementary feedstock. But it brings you back to the dilemma that you are in essence would be relying on an imported feedstock. In Secunda, we've got a bit of a different challenge in the long term, and that's the environmental challenge. So those of you that follow Sasol will know that we've committed to a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Now we are using a host of projects, mostly in energy efficiency, looking at sourcing some renewable electricity, etc. But to the extent that ultimately, if these suite of projects, if they don't assist us fully to reduce our greenhouse gases, the ultimate impact will be that we will have to start cutting back on coal gasification in Secunda. And the unfortunate thing is with ammonia, the ammonia that we produce in Secunda is fairly directly related to the coal gasification. So yeah, coal is clearly a very competitive feedstock, and we've got enough coal for many decades, but there the environmental risk is staring us. So if you ask whether there's any good news that I can share, I think in the long term, Sasol certainly has got an ambition to start to produce green products. And in the case of ammonia, it would then be green ammonia. So if you ask how do one produce green ammonia, you use green hydrogen. And how do you produce the green hydrogen? You use renewable electricity, either from solar or wind. And you then use a process called electrolysis, where you basically split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you use that hydrogen as your feedstock. But as is the case with all these green and newer technologies, they work in the laboratory and they work on pilot scale. But to make them commercially viable against the fossil fuel alternatives is easier said than done. And to be perfectly honest, I think, I'm not sure whether it's going to be 3, 5, or 10 years, but it's going to take considerable time before commercial scale production of green ammonia could compete effectively with imported alternatives. It is something to look forward to there. I personally, can't see a better future for South Africa's fertilizer industry if in a decade from now, we could become almost self-sufficient in local ammonia production using green hydrogen as a feedstock. But it's a long road to travel. Corné, I think I'll stop at that. Unfortunately, quite a bit of headwinds, but.
So
I'll stop at that.
Yeah, Johannes, thank you so much for that. I think that puts it in perspective. Just to make sure I understand correctly, so the half of our ammonia is produced through the coal gasification process, and the other half comes from gas out of Mozambique.
100%.
So we're basically in a shortage of ammonia.
Yeah, I think I would guess probably at least 20 and sometimes even up to 30%, I would guess, of our ammonia is probably already being imported on top of Sasol's production.
So just allow me for another follow-up question. When you get ammonia and then you have to make a decision on what's going to be done with the ammonia, whether it's going to be used for manufacturing of fertilizer or for using in explosives.
Yep.
What drives that decision?
Yeah, you must try to ask a question where I can give good news, Corné. Yes, so I think the hard reality is that it's more feasible, both economically and from a safety and regulatory perspective. It's just more feasible to import ammonium nitrate-based fertilizers than what is the case with ammonium nitrate-based explosives. So I think one will tend to see that ammonium nitrate, a significant portion, probably at this stage more than half of the ammonium nitrate in South Africa is used for explosives manufacturing. Okay. And it's obviously going to depend on how the explosives industry grow or decline in time will impact that balance.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Johannes, for that. I think, Congress, it's the picture for nitrogen. We have potential. There's new technologies coming in, so it's something we can take forward and look and see how we can improve our nitrogen self-sufficiency in South Africa. So our next panelist is Nkumi. She's head of agro-processing or the chief director, at agro-processing at the DTIC. Nkumi, welcome here. We are really fortunate to have you here. We also have Ima Maleng as a guest, and I just want to introduce you to her. She helped us with the soybean value chain and what the success. She helped us set up all the crushing capacity for the soybean industry, and wow, that was really amazing. Thank you. So, Ima, and thank you, Nkumi. I think we've heard the challenges, and your department specifically looks at import replacement. And you are working on the stuff like the poultry master plan, various other master plans. We have already heard of the chemical master plan that's currently being established. What kind of industrial development tools do we have to help the fertilizer industry in South Africa?
Thank you, Connie and Chair, and good afternoon, Congress. I think it is important that we are quite aware as government that, most businesses, they are in distress following, also the impact of, COVID. And if you look at the fertilizer, value chain, as I think the speakers have indicated, that the major challenge that now the industry has to look at it's affordable prices or the surge of, fertilizer prices, which actually have got a lot of impact in terms of, the margins for the farmers. And we're talking about the farmers who are already in distress. So from a government proposition point of view, we are collaborating with Grain SA. Thank you so much, Grain SA, in terms of collaborating with us on a number of interventions from an industrial point of view as part of our reimagined industrial strategy. As Connor has indicated earlier on, that we are developing quite a number of master plans, including, by the way, the agriculture and agro-processing master plans. The master plans are very important because they actually look at, the social compact, where we're looking at collaboration with both government, private sector, including, by the way, the international partners that I think presented this morning, which were talking about the technologies that we need to bring into our industry, as well as, organized labor, and more importantly, I think our traders as well as importers. So we need to look at establishing under some of the master plan that I talked about, either the agriculture, agro-processing master plan or the chemicals master plan, a round table discussion where we are going to bring all the parties together to look at this issue. Because what we have noted in terms of the cost structure for the fertilizer industry, it's, things like, for example, your sea freight costs, it's things like your port costs, it's things like your fuel costs, and then more importantly, how are we going to make sure our roads infrastructure is actually improved to make sure that, the product is accessible to our farmers. So one intervention that we are looking at in terms of the master plan, across the master plan to improve, the manufacturing capabilities for the industry, it's mainly your incentive program to make sure that we industrialize, but more important, to improve our manufacturing capabilities. So it is important that when we work in through the structure, the roundtable structure, we look at where exactly are we going to incentivize in terms of our manufacturing capabilities. I think our colleague from Sasol has indicated that, and I think also the chair has indicated, we're a net importer of fertilizer. Can't we look at localization programs that we can put in place together with the industry, even if it's inorganic fertilizer, to work very closely with the industry in terms of establishing that. And then also saying that that's part of the import replacement, opportunities that we can sort of look at through the sort of that value chain. And then also secondly, I think we can also look at storage facilities as part of the incentive, program, including, by the way, your warehousing, including your packaging costs. Those are some of the costs that actually impact on the sort of final, cost of the product. And then also, I think regional integration becomes very important because I think our colleague from Sasol has indicated most of the companies, they've got a footprint, especially the fertilizer companies in South, they've got footprint in the SADC region. So as part of our continental free trade area, can we look at, regional integration in terms of, focus on the regional infrastructure, focusing on, trade corridors, to focus more on the harmonization of the fertilizer, standards as well as regulations. I think that was one of the discussions I think that was taking place also this morning from our colleagues from Delrat. Another thing that I wanted to suggest, various provincial departments, they are providing also support in terms of, supplying fertilizer or providing fertilizer to our farmers. Can we look at, procurement, kind of, partnership between, let's say, Grain SA as well as, the farmers as well as government, where we're looking at bulk, procurement in terms of supporting those farmers rather than to look at, provinces doing, procurement on an individual basis. So it's one of, I think, Cornel, something that I thought about, partnership in terms of, encouraging, our procurement policies that will enhance, the bulk buying. The last issue that I wanted to talk about, it's mainly, our exchange rate. That has got a lot of impact in terms, because most of, the fertilizer prices, as you would know, that they are controlled mainly by international prices. So unfortunately, there's very little that we can do in that regard. But more importantly, I think the industry has to sort of have a strategic conversation sit down and look at these issues and look at, interventions that can be put in place. I don't want to say let's come up with the fertilizer master plan, because already there's a chemicals master plan, which is looking at the shortage of some of these chemicals, as our colleague has indicated earlier on. But where we can localize, let's look at localization of the fertilizer program. But more importantly, I think to try and sort of make sure that we create the jobs, because by importing, it means we're exporting jobs. So those are some of, I think, the initiatives that we need to think about. The last issue that I wanted to, I've got my partner from IDC, that we've got, I think, in terms of our incentive now, the minister has made pronouncement of the agri-industrial fund that is going to support, across, the agro-processing value chain, including the fertilizer value chain. And from DTIC, we also have quite a number of incentives, including the agro-processing support scheme. So all our incentive schemes in terms of applications and whatever, they are online. You can go to our website, which is www.dtic.gov.za, and then you will download all the applications and so on and so forth. Yeah. I think, let me put it like that. I can talk up until a colleague comes home, but I think those are, I think, a government proposition from a reimagined industrial point of view that I think can help the industry to make sure that the fertilizer prices are affordable. Thanks. But not also, because we've seen also what is happening in terms of the truck business now. What is happening on the roads, especially if you go on entry and so on and so forth. So those are some of the strategic decisions we need to have with the organized labor in terms of, the trucking business and so on and so forth. Yeah, thanks.
Kumi, thank you very much for that introduction. I think what I would like to hear is definitely a fertilizer master plan, but we will be okay if the fertilizer can fit in with the chemicals
master plan. Or the agriculture and agro-processing master plan.
That will do, definitely. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. Gampi, I'm going to skip you for now. I'm going to leave you for last. Louis, the marketing director of Omnia. Omnia is very vested into South Africa, rooted in South Africa, brought a lot of capital to South Africa, and is one of the biggest manufacturers of fertilizer right to the farmer, on the farms. Welcome, Louis. I think let's start off with asking you, what do you see as the major challenges that we have in the local fertilizer industry, but also looking at the opportunities on the other side?
Thank you, Corné. Thank you very much. Now, it's always good to start this with a bit of a lighter moment. En ek ry vanoggend hiernatoe en my telefoon lei net so na 7 en dis toe my jongste seun wat op die stadium sy lewe verskriklik geniet op universiteit. En gewoonlik as hy my net na 7 bel, dan antwoord ek: "Môre my kind, wat 'n moeilikheid het jy?" Hy sê pa, nee, ek het nie moeilikheid nie, maar ek het met mamma gepraat, maar sy sê vir my pa, neem vanmiddag deur in 'n vuurpeloton. Ek wou net sê sterkte. My antwoord aan hom was: "Jong, dit kan baie slegter as 'n vuurpeloton wees." But Corné, thank you very much. First of all, I want to start off by saying thank you very much for the opportunity created. At the end of the day, us as Omnia is vested in this business, and we're here to solve the problem because we're also dependent in terms of the people sitting in the hall surviving. And then also allow me the opportunity to send Omnia's greetings to Grain SA and wishing you all the best for your Congress. Now, I thought it would be a good starting point to give an overview of how us as an importer of fertilizer, a producer of fertilizer, and then also a distributor of fertilizer to yourselves sees the world. And I'm going to do it by briefly touching on the 4 types of fertilizer that you can buy. First 2 I'm going to handle is 1, the so-called straights, which is urea, MAP, and KCl. And then what I want to put into the mix is the so-called bulk blends. And to be able to make bulk blends, we need to add LAN or CAN to the mixture as a nitrogen source, and also ammonium sulfate, which is a granular. Now looking at these 6 raw materials, urea, as we all know, is completely imported. There's no local production capacity on the continent for that matter. MAP, we partially import as Andre has shown, and we also buy locally. And potash obviously is imported from across the world. LAN is locally produced, and we also have to import the deficit, and ammonium sulfate, the granular, is also imported. The next category is chemically compounded fertilizer. Pretty much the same raw materials used. I think the one difference is, as Johannes has alluded to, is ammonium nitrate, iron ore, ammonium nitrate solution, and then that obviously is produced through a nitric acid plant from the ammonia that we then buy, and as Johannes said, the ammonia is then locally sourced, but also imported through the port of Richards Bay. Ammonium sulfate we've discussed. MAP we've discussed, locally bought and also imported. The other one which we add into the mix is rock phosphate. It's processed rock phosphate, where I think it's general knowledge that we spent some capital where we built a nitrophos plant where we buy locally produced rock phosphate. We react that with nitric acid, which we get from the ammonia process, and we produce a product called nitrophos, which is then a substitute for MAP or DAP. And then obviously potash, which is imported from across the world. The last product is liquid fertilizer. Nitrogen source is ammonium nitrate, as I discussed, and urea. The P is phosphoric acid, which we only buy locally, and then obviously ammonium sulfate, potash, and the like. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, only imported products is urea and MOP or KCl. What we partially import and buy locally is CAN or LAN, MAP, and ammonium sulfate. And then what's locally purchased is obviously rock phosphate and then phosphoric acid. Nou, die uitdagings wat ons as 'n verskaffer aan u beleef elke dag en as 'n produsent wil ek opdeel in twee kategorieë. Die eerste is die voorsieningsketting, die mooi Afrikaans daarvoor is die supply chain, en die tweede een is uit die aard van die saak energiekostes of dan 'n utility costs, soos wat ons dit in Engels ook noem. Wat die supply chain uitdagings betref, wil ek dit opdeel in twee gedeeltes. Die eerste is dan nou uit die aard van die saak invoere, die invoer uitdagings. En die eerste is uit die aard van die saak ons hawe infrastruktuur. The capacity of our ports to import the volumes. Now, if you've looked at Andre's slides, you would see that in 2009, we've imported 750,000 tons, and last year we imported 2.3 million tons. That's threefold in 12 years. And what we see happens, and as Andre rightfully pointed to, is that a lot of the cargo that goes to Beira and Maputo, where you've got these storms, eventually get pushed down to the port of Durban, and obviously the congestion. Now, you know as well as I do that there was very little development, not from a berthing perspective, but also from a port storage perspective. And I will elaborate on that in a minute. From a local purchase perspective, I think you staying in the country, in the areas where you are, I can tell you nothing about the road infrastructure. It's deteriorating, and I always said to the people in Johannesburg that we've got a 500 to a 700 kilogram per hectare logistical problem. Farmers, if you're a maize farmer, you've got a 5 to 7 ton per hectare logistical problem. If you farm citrus, you've got a 30 to 60 ton per hectare logistical problem. And your sugarcane, you're going up to 120 ton per hectare logistical problem. But the state of the roads is incredible. The strike, the effectiveness of our transport, the strike of the past 2 days cost Omnia between 4 and 5 million rand, only for those 2 days. Where the truck is loaded, it gets pulled off and have to stand for a day, and someone needs to pick that cost up. The riots that we saw last year, and which is ever glooming, has an impact on insurance, has an impact on the risk, and increases the cost of logistics. And I think the fuel cost needs no more explanation. From a logistical perspective, ladies and gentlemen, I think our biggest opportunity is to get rail going again. We compete against the rest of the world. We compete against the rest of the world where transport is done by rail. Now, let me give you just an insight in terms what we were used to. And it was the times when Corné said we had a proper infrastructure. We would import a vessel of 40,000 tons. And let me do this in Afrikaans. Ons sal 'n skip invoer van 40,000 ton. Ons sal met spoornet reël om vir ons 2 bloktreine te gee. Ons sal die skip in die 2 bloktreine aflaai en hy sal ry na die binneland toe waar die produk versak word, weer op spoor gelaai word en by u naaste stasie aan die plaas aan u gelewer word. Vandag laai ons die 40,000 ton skip af in tippers van tussen 6 en 8 ton. Ons ry hom na 'n stoor in die hawe toe. Daarvan af laai ons hom op 'n interlink, ry hom na 'n versakkingsplek toe of versak hom daar. Van daar af weer na 'n stoor toe in jou omgewing en dan wanneer jy hom wil hê na jou plaas toe. Ek dink ou het nie 'n groot graad nodig om die som te maak in terme van die koste wat verlore gaan nie. In terme van die reliability, nou loop ek uit Afrikaans uit die betroubaarheid van spoornet is ongelooflik. Ons is op 'n plek waar ons 200 ammoniak tankers gebou het teen 'n koste van 2,5 miljoen rand stuk om ammoniak van Richards Bay tot in Sasolburg te kry. Maar ons is afhanklik van trekkrag van Transnet af. En dit is haas onmoontlik om die ammoniak van Richards Bay tot in Sasolburg te kry. Ek sien ek moet klaarmaak. Uit die aard van die saak is dit kapitaal en die kapitaal moet van ergens af verhaal word. Utility cost, energy, water, labor, I mean, that's well known to yourselves. Water is a big thing. And the sad part of water is that there's no substitute other than what we currently have. I'm closing off, Mr. Chairman. AN, we've got 2 choices. It's either ammonium nitrate or urea. Ammonium nitrate is the cost of ammonia, the movement of ammonia, and then the conversion cost of ammonia to usable fertilizer. Urea, we have what we have. We've got international prices, we've got logistical issues, and we've got import issues. Phosphates, we have to leverage the local resources. We're sitting with the best rock, not on the continent, but we're sitting with the best rock in the globe from a rock phosphate perspective.
Yeah.
We need to buy local. We need to buy local to get the fixed cost down to make us more competitive. Infrastructure, we don't have a choice but to upgrade the infrastructure. And then in closing, logistical infrastructure is costing us more by the day, and we need to see how we sort that out. Thank you very much, Corné.
Louis, yeah, thanks. Louis, yeah, thank you for pointing out the challenges that we have, but also the opportunities that do exist. I think the infrastructure is very important. Our harbour infrastructure, our logistical infrastructure, whether it's roads or the rail, is definitely we need to work on intensely in South Africa, not only for our input industry, but for the whole value chain. I want to link on with what Louis said about having our own local resources. And I think in this case, it's talking about the elephant that's not currently in the room. And being Foscor. And unfortunately, as I said, they had to cancel on Friday at short notice, not to present on the panel. But for me, how I see it, and our farmers see it as well, every one of us have a soft spot for a South African company. Foscor is South African. It's a national strategic resource that, as Louis said, is possibly the best resource in the world. So I think that's definitely something we need to pick up we need to be able to produce at the capacity, the nameplate capacity that Foscor has, and then we can produce for the whole of SADC. And that will already change the dynamics of our needs for imports. So Gampi, I'm now with you, being from the IDC, bankable projects, that's what you look at, agro-processing. How do you see us taking the local fertilizer industry forward? You're also looking at import replacement, possible solutions for South Africa. We've heard how much Valita is going out of the country, how much jobs we are actually exporting by importing so much fertilizer. How do you see us taking, as South Africans, the fertilizer industry forward?
Thanks, Corne, Chairperson, and good afternoon, Congress. IDC, throughout its 82 years of existence, strive to industrialize South Africa. And we know with the likes of Sasol, where IDC had a hand in. So what we look at as IDC, we look to look into new projects which seek to localize. One of those, I think, Sasol colleague has already alluded to, is the hydrogen economy. We've already started work on that, but obviously it's difficult to predict as to how long it takes. It may be that in 10 years, it may be that in 5 years we're able to do that. We're still at the pre-feasibility stages. Obviously, to do that, you also need technical partners who will be willing to take equity in and participate, because we are not in the business of running businesses. We only fund us, we enhance the process by maybe taking equity to de-risk the project. Another one is coal. While we know that the world is striving towards more cleaner energy and a cleaner environment, but coal, we must admit that coal is still one of the most readily available resources in South Africa, and we should take advantage of that, be it go in that way, but investing in cleaner technologies while processing it. The dilemma that we're facing is there is another project we're looking at of partnering with an international partner to use coal in production of ammonia. The challenge is the process also is water hungry. Where do we find our coal resources or the large reserves? They're sitting on the other side of Limpopo, and unfortunately that's the driest part of the country. So that's another challenge that we have to deal with. But as the organization, through our project development division, we're willing and are ready to partner with whoever comes with ideas. And we're willing to, even if it's still at the very early stages, we're willing to put money and share risk with the partners. So if there are such opportunities, you're more than welcome to talk to us. Infrastructure, obviously, is one of those that the previous speakers have cited as the one of the big contributors as well. We also, in recent years, established an infrastructure unit. We never used to focus on that. Our focus was more on the industrial side, but we realized that there is it's a very important part in the agro-processing space, be it from road, rail infrastructure to storage, be it cold chain facilities and all that. So we participate in that space. But also, we're having access to a suite of incentives that are offered by our parent department, which is the DTIC, while doing that. So I will implore to the business people and businesses that are represented here, if they're having those opportunities and ideas, to reach out to us, to invite us as a partner to can work with them. Thank you.
Great. Gampi, thank you so much for that. Can I ask the panel members, after I gave everyone a chance, have you picked up something that we might have missed? Starting with you, Johannes.
Corneille, no, thanks. Not something that you've missed. I think just to emphasize, obviously, first price is more local manufacturing.
Yeah.
But if you look at how much we are importing and you listen to, what has been said here, I think the hard reality is that the biggest lever in the short term to manage fertilizer cost and the reliability of supply is to work with Transnet, for the industry to work with Transnet and the government to make logistics more sustainable and more cost effective. I think Sasol, I'm not sure what the latest number is, but I know we export probably more than 1 million tons per annum chemicals. And,
Not ammonia.
No.
Okay. Just make
it's interesting that, that while we're very short on some, we are certainly long on others. And, so while Louis and Omnia and others are struggling to bring products in, we are equally struggling to take products out. My understanding is that there is a business unit South Africa working with some government entities and other private organizations has put together what they call a logistics coordinated committee that are now meeting on a bi-monthly basis. And I think maybe, if the fertilizer industry members and so on, can certainly do with all getting in there. Ultimately, if all the commodities are competing for a certain rail and road capacity. And if you don't stand strong to find your spot in the sun there, it's just going to be difficult.
Yes. So, in short, Congress, one of the low-hanging fruits is logistics, Transnet, infrastructure. When you look at our import parity pricing for fertilizer, say, for example, you import urea from Eastern Europe, you can add at least 45% to your FOB Eastern Europe. And that just tells us what logistics and infrastructure cost us as farmers. Nkumi, any additions from your side?
I think I like the suggestion around the getting our rail going. I think it should be one of the take-homes for the Congress. That we need to work very closely with Transnet as well as the Department of Transport to look at alternative kind of routes than to use the road transport. I think let's look at that through the sort of the roundtable discussion. Maybe we bring the Department of Transport and Transnet on the table.
We definitely need to.
Yeah, thanks.
Gampi, from your side, before we give the audience a chance to ask questions, any other additions?
I think, yes, logistics, and I'm glad that there's been an announcement recently. It looks like there is willingness from government side to allow Transnet to privatize portion of or partner with other companies. I think that will go a long way in dealing with the backlog.
Thanks, Gampi. Louis, enigiets nog van jou?
Ja, Corneille, ek dink we need to realize that this is a crisis. We can't talk for another 2-3 years. We need to survive this year.
Sure.
Because this year is the problem.
Yes.
With what's happening in the world, it's a crisis, and we need to act now and fast.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea, ammonia prices have increased more than 200% on an annual basis. And that's the start of
I'm not smiling.
Andre, any last words before we give the Congress a chance to ask questions?
Corneille, se mens net ons sit hier en ons bespreek vandag kunsmis. Maar kunsmis is nie die probleem nie. Dis die goed rondom kunsmis wat vir ons die groot probleem op die oomblik is. Ja, daar's 'n oorlog wat die pryse mal maak. Maar ons probleem is om die goed effektief op boere se plase te kry, dat boere op hulle plase kan bly. En dit is eintlik hartseer dat ons hier sit en ons bespreek kunsmis en dis nie fisies kunsmis wat die probleem is nie.
Yes. Dankie Andrei. So we've got ample time for questions. Any inputs, enige bydrae van lede van die kongres, enige idees. Ons is in Graan SA as ons gewoond om oplossingsgedrewe te wees en nie net in die probleme vas te kyk nie. So asseblief help ons dink aan oplossings vir die probleem wat ons het. Ek sien hom Dizzy. Is die eerste vraag en Jaco Breitenbach tweede vraag.
Corneille, baie dankie. Miskien net 'n vinnige opmerking. Ek dink is 'n klap aan die gesig van die boere dat Voskhor nie vandag hier is nie. Terwyl die boere hulle grootste kliënt is. Voorsitter, kunsmis bestaan uit fosfaat, stikstoffosfaat en potas. Ek herinner my in die jare 1970, 1980 was ons 70% selfvoorsienend geweest en 30% het ons ingevoer. Ons het hoofsaaklik kalium ingevoer en 'n bietjie stikstof ingevoer. Louis het reg daarna verwys. Ons sit met die beste fosfaatbronne in die wêreld. En tog is dit ons duurste produk. Wat het geword van die kapasiteit wat ons gehad het in die 70 en 80er jare? Dat ons nie daai kapasiteit kan terugbring en die boere daarmee kan behulpsaam wees nie. Ek dink dit is 'n skande vir 'n maatskappy soos Voskhor om nie vandag hier te wees nie. Dankie voorsitter.
Dankie Dizzy. Jaco.
Meneer die voorsitter, ek wil net twee begrippe vestig hierso. Die een is insetsekerheid en die ander een is nasionale bate wat van die menere aangeraak het. Die eerste ding van die insetsekerheid is ons in opdrag van die kongres besoek ons Fertiliser en CropLife en Sansor elke jaar en ons gaan praat met daai mense oor krisisse tussen die bedryf en die maatskappye wat daar betrokke is en ons onderhandel met hulle, wys vir hulle oor prys wat vir ons belangrik is en ja, ons kry baie goeie terugvoering van CropLife. Met Sansor dieselfde saadmaatskappye byvoorbeeld gesê ons pryse behoort nie meer as inflasie te styg hierdie jaar nie. Dit is aan die een kant, maar ons het verlede jaar 'n vergadering gehad op 'n stadium met Voskhor. Dis nou die leesstoel op die verhoog wat nie daar is nie, wat die olifant plat gesit het wat agter die verhoog lê nou op die oomblik. Het ons gesê dat ons 'n insetsekerheid breek gaan hê. Nou as jy nie insetsekerheid het nie, kan jy nie voedselsekerheid het nie. Die twee skakel mekaar in. En elke jaar kom Graan SA en nadat ons al die verskillende maatskappye of belangeorganisasies besoek het, dan kan ons terugkom na Graan SA se hoofbestuur en sê dit lyk of ons hierdie jaar 'n insetsekerheid gaan hê. En daar's baie keer klein goedjies gewees en ons kommunikeer tussen die maatskappye en die produsente en voordat hulle plant is dit reggestel. Nou meneer Rian Rademan is nou nie vandag hier nie, maar ek het hom beloof ek gaan vir hom verantwoordelik roep daarvoor dat as daar insetsekerheidsbreuke gaan wees, dat ek dit vir hom gaan sê nou, ek wil dit vir hom vandag sê, daar was tye met MAP wat ons groot krisisse gehad het. Wat ons nou al gehoor het van die here daarvoor, dat Voskhor het genoeg MAP of grondstowwe om vir 90 jaar nie net Suid-Afrika nie, maar vir Suidelike Afrika van MAP te voorsien. Wat hulle ook is van die beste fosfaatbronne kwaliteit in die wêreld is by Daan Palaborwa en dan die ander een is dat dit 'n baie goeie produk is wat hulle het. En as julle sien, ons het 300.000 ton ingevoer, ons verbruik is 320.000 ton in Suid-Afrika die laaste jaar. So Voskhor, ek is nou op die Voskhor waantjie, so Voskhor het nie eers 10% van die produksie van die mense in hierdie land in hierdie saal of die boere wat ons hier verteenwoordig kon hulle voorsien hier, terwyl hulle die hele suidelike Afrika kon voorsien van dit. En ek weet nie, jy weet, dis 'n nasionale bate vir ons, soos die Vaallam 'n nasionale bate is, soos die mense in hierdie, elke citizen in hierdie land 'n nasionale bate vir die land is, so is daai plek 'n nasionale bate. Ek sê nie, hulle moenie uitvoer nie, hulle moet kan geld maak, hulle moet valuta verdien, maar dit is nie aanvaarbaar nie, dis glad nie aanvaarbaar nie. Baie dankie mense.
Dankie Jaco, baie dankie vir daai bydrae. Richard, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think our situation is ununique to the world, and I'd like to bring a similarity of Australia, that their last manufacturing plant closed some time ago, and their reaction is to create and build a new plant using natural gas, and that plant will supply 96% of their fertilizer requirements in Australia at a cost of 4.3 billion Australian dollar. Now, while we have some manufacturing capacity in this country, we still rely on imports to supply. So we move immediately to import parity on pricing. This is highlighted in Andre's graph of being the second most expensive fertilizer consumer in the world. And my question to the panelists is, I'm hearing there's a logistical problem in this country, and we're trying to address that through various platforms, and Peter's driving that for us, AMP as platform. But how do we create additional manufacturing capacity in this country to fulfill the needs of the demand? That's one way to drive prices down, that we can move to even perhaps an output parity. We've got the resources, we should be able to do it competitively and cheaply, as opposed to importing and with the logistical issues and the supply issues. The security of food security and production inputs here is an underlying question in the instability of the world at the moment. You know, do we approach the IADC? Do we approach PIC, who's a major shareholder that, funnily enough, tried to sell their share in Foscor and couldn't find a buyer? What stands us to do as producers in this country to help find a solution for this problem? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that contribution. I think that was the exact question we had from the get-go. How do we use our current natural resources that we do have efficient enough? And I think that's something we need to take forward in some sort of master plan or a roundtable discussion with the larger industry. I don't know if one of you would like to help answer or direct us where we need to go.
Yeah, I can try and maybe add something to that. And at the end of the day, fertilizer production is very energy intensive. And it's also, as has been alluded to, it's a volume-based product. Now, in order to expand, you need to have supply of security of electricity, which is a problem in our country at this point in time. And it's fairly capital intensive. And you compete against an international producer who can deliver it here cheaper than what we can produce it, given the uncertainties that we have. And ladies and gentlemen, and I don't want to talk for Foscor, but the logistical issues also hampers them, where the rock sits in Palabora and they make the MAP in phosphoric acid in Richards Bay. So the cost of getting the rock to Richards Bay also costs them dearly. And that all adds up to being competitive in the global market. So we should not underestimate our infrastructure from a logistical perspective. And then they import sulfur to make sulfuric acid, which is also a logistical issue. We sit with a vessel now outside Foscor, outside Richards Bay today, which is costing us $30,000 a day on demurrage because we can't offload. And it just speaks to our infrastructure.
Thanks, Louis. It almost sounds like we're talking more about infrastructure and logistics than what Andre alluded to than fertilizer.
It's about the efficacy of our infrastructure.
Yeah. Questions? Kobus?
Kobus Grobbelaar hier van streek 24. Ek het klaar my Engels opgebruik. Ek wil gou vra as die Rusland oorlog voortgaan en SASL moet besluit tussen plofstof en fertilizer. Gaan hulle fertilizer maak of plofstof? En dan kan mense kyk na Saldanha Baai om invoere van daar af te doen omdat Durban so duur is nie. Net 'n vraag. En dan met dit wat nou wel in die internasionaal aangaan, gaan Omnia kunsmis nou koop jy ons kunsmis, gaan die kunsmis kom, weet afgesien van die infrastruktuur, weet wat is Omnia se plan met die kunsmis wat op, weet, infrastruktuur gaan ons sê, ons kan nie rail netwerk nou probeer regmaak, maar ek bedoel, dis ook nie ding wat mense oor aan nag gaan doen nie. So dit is 'n probleem wat ons moet uitsorteer, maar ek dink ons groot probleem huidiglik is kunsmis om in die land in te kom vir ons seisoen wat op pad is. So dis maar ek wil net weet, Omnia is die grootste, wat het julle plan? Moet ons kunsmis koop? Moet ons sojas plant? Moet ons lande laat lê? Wat se plan het julle vir ons? Dankie.
Okay. Thanks, Kobus. Kobus Grobbelaar. I had almost 3 questions there. The first one was a loaded question, loaded. I don't know, Johannes, if one can answer the question on the situation in Russia, how does it affect your decision making on where ammonia would go into the market?
Thanks, Kobus. Yeah, so I think I can honestly say that what happens in Russia, will have no impact on how we, to whom we sell our ammonia. Our ammonia, we've got fixed long-term contracts on ammonia supply, and we obviously do everything we can to honor those contracts, irrespective of what happens in international markets. As I said earlier, and I'll be brutally honest, when it comes to ammonium nitrate and then manufacturing ammonium nitrate-based fertilizers or explosives, I think the reality is that it is generally more viable to import fertilizers than explosives. And for that reason, I think you'll also find that there's probably more long-term, firm, steady volume kind of contracts in place on explosives than what might be the case on fertilizers. So yeah, nothing is going to change on our side, but that trade-off is going to continue.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. The second question I heard was, is Saldanha as a port, is it an option?
Yeah, we've investigated that. Saldanha is at this point in time, I mean, just doesn't make sense from a distance perspective. Capacity perspective, also, are they not geared and rigged to the tune that we have locally here? So Saldanha doesn't work towards this side. It works towards Zambia and Angola, but not necessarily to our side.
Okay. But do you want to... sorry?
Ek dink op Saldanha moet ons... Saldanha is hulle baie ver gevorderd om die containers uit die Kaapse hawe te skuif soontoe. As 5 jaar terug was daar al deur die staat ondersoeke gedoen oor 'n treinspoor tussen Kaapstad en Saldanha. Nou met die chaos wat gebeur het rondom die vrugte wat hierdie seisoen gebeur het, is dit weer baie ernstig op die tafel afgestof. So ons hoop, die wiel draai stadig, maar ons hoop dat Saldanha dit gaan doen, want wat vir die Kaapse aspekte dit gemaak is, dit gaan hy druk uit die Kaapse hawe uithaal, as ons die containers by Saldanha kan kry. Want die een groot probleem is die wind in die Kaap ook, so die bote kan nie aflaai nie, die goed bly lê in die hawens, en hulle ry dan verby. Dit is hoekom ons so sukkel met ander se plastic. So dit is die storie rondom Saldanha op die oomblik.
Dankie. Dankie, Andre. Louis, did you want to add to the Saldanha, or can we talk about availability? Kobus had a question there about the availability. Lots of our farmers got this question. I think the international markets feel that well, this was before Russia and Ukraine, felt that we almost at the peak of international fertilizer prices. So how do you see, how do we handle the availability? Are we waiting for prices to cool down before we get in our major stocks, or does some of the companies have the strategy to have the availability right through the year?
Yeah, Corne, thank you for the question. I think from an Omnia perspective, I can assure you today that we're working day and night to secure fertilizer. We are dependent on supplying you fertilizer. Maar ek dink wat krities belangrik is, en ek is nie ongeskik om my telefoon uit te haal nie, maar hier's 'n SMS wat omgaan wat sê omtrent al Suid-Afrika se fosfaat en kalium kom vanuit Rusland uit. Alle skeepsvrag is gestop. Ons het vandag gehoor ons kan van môre af geen PNK bestel nie. En dan die klassieke Suid-Afrikaanse een, hierdie ontvang as feite HKGK. Nou, dames en here, ek kan nie vandag vir u sê dat daar sal elke dag van hierdie jaar vir die kunsmis wees nie. Maar Rusland is nie die be-all en end-all nie. Daar is alternatiewe en ons kan al die lys van produkte wat ek vir u genoem het vroeër, kan ons van ander plekke af invoer. Wat ons moet verstaan is dat die noordelike halfrond besig is om reg te maak om te plant, en uit die aard van die saak het hulle die aankope van herroumateriale vertraag in afwagting laat pryse laer gaan word. So almal is laat en nou die pryse omgedraai. En die vraag is, wat gaan gebeur? Verander hulle in die Weskaap en in die winterreënvalgebied, is dit 'n moeilike situasie nou, maar as jy vandag nie kunsmis in die Weskaap het nie, dan gaan jy die plantseisoen mis, dis die realiteit. En as ons dan praat van die somerreënvalgebied, dan dink ek het ons tyd om planne te maak. En Corne, ek wil miskien die geleentheid misbruik, en ek wil myself beskikbaar stel, en as u met my wil gesels, of as ek na die boerevereniging toe moet kom, ek is meer as welkom. Maar ek dink wat krities is dat jy 'n plan het. Het sy te sê, ek gaan my posisioneer vir 60% van wat ek gaan plant, en ek gaan risiko vat op die laaste. Maar hê 'n plan vandag. Besluit jy gaan jou fosfaat en kalium koop of jou plantermengsel, en jy gaan jou ammoniumnitraat los vir later, want jy kan dit vervang met ureum. Maar hê 'n plan.
Thank you for that, Louis. Just remember, Louis is also a marketing director, so he can sell fertilizer.
No good intentions goes unpunished. Eh?
I see Umdani Menar for a last question.
Corne, dankie vir die geleentheid. Ek dink ons sit vanmiddag hier gehoor van 'n paar sleutel industrieë. Ons hoor van hawens, ons hoor van spoor. Die staat het vir ons nog heeltyd gesê dit bly sy bates. Ons sien die onderhandelings wat die laaste paar maande plaasgevind het, dat die staat soek beleggers in hawens. Hulle wil van die spoor uitkontrakteer. En dan wil ek Foskor bysluit wat sê dis natuurlik 'n strategiese bate. En julle moet my korrigeer, maar as ek reg is, het die IDC 59% van die aandele in Foskor.
Ja.
So as die baas van Foskor op die verhoog sit, maar Foskor is nie daar nie, dan is my vraag, word Foskor optimaal bestuur? Is hy effektief? Is dit nie tyd dat Foskor ook geprivatiseer word nie? En is dit nie die opdrag wat ons moet gee nie?
Thank you, Dani, for that also very loaded question on the infrastructure. I think we're all on the same page. Also, with regards to Foskor as a strategic national resource for South Africa. Gampi, out of the IDC, I don't know if you can answer that question. We know it's public knowledge that the IDC shares is up for purchase. I don't know if there's anything one can share at this stage. There's very sensitive dealings going on as we here in the fertilizer industry, but you can say yes or no if you can answer that question.
Corne, I think the question is, or the response thereof is above my pay grade, but what I can safely say is that, yes, when IDC announced its results, it was mentioned that there is an interest and there's been an international party that has put an offer on the table. That's all that I know, but also in terms of why are we here as IDC and they're not here, we invest in so many businesses, but we're not running the businesses, we just investors, and we let the governance, good governance take place, so we don't lord over them. Otherwise, it will make it difficult for us to actually invest in our country.
Yeah. Gampi, thank you so much for that. We came to the end of our session. We already ran 2 minutes over on the clock. There's lots of food for thought. There's definitely takeaways. There's opportunities. Although we know that we have major challenges with infrastructure and administrative issues, but I think we had lots of takeaways that we can take forward. So I want to thank all the panelists from Andre, Louis, Gampi, Kumi, and Johannes. Thank you so much.
Kongres, ja, gee my die geleentheid om net ons paneellede te bedank. To the panelists, my sincere appreciation for your participation in the panel today. And then I would be amiss if I didn't pose some challenges to you going away. We were hoping for takeaway messages. I think the one good thing that I did hear was from Louis, when he said we need to solve the problem now. It's this year, it's the coming season. It's a winter crop that we're about to plant, and it's a summer crop that we need to plan for. We need to solve that problem now. My question to you, Louis, is though we spoke a lot about infrastructure and the effect that infrastructure has, but I'm a farmer. Tell me simply, plainly, if a ton of nitrogen costs me 20,000 Rand a ton, if we fix all this infrastructure tomorrow, what's the nitrogen going to cost me then? Thanks, Yanni. How does that work? Do you understand? You understand my challenge, Louis? I want to know specifics. I want to know what the target is. You tell me I must target infrastructure. I want to know what the target is that I need to target to fix. Then, Kongres, ek dink julle sal met my saamstem. Hier is 'n lid, ek moet vir julle sê, hier is 'n lid van Voskor in die gehoor wat die vraag opneem en sal terugdra na Voskor toe. Maar ek dink dis 'n skande. Dit is onaanvaarbaar dat Voskor Vrydagmiddag, nadat hulle aanvaar het om deel te neem aan ons paneel, aan die gesprek, dit is onaanvaarbaar dat hulle nie opgedaag het nie, ongeag wat gebeur het. Ek het vanoggend vir die paneel gesê, jy weet ons, of vir die regering gesê, die departement gesê, ons is ernstig oor ons besigheid. As ons sê ons gaan oplossings saamvind, ons kan nie oplossings saamvind as die persoon met wie ons moet saamwerk nie in die kamer is nie. En ons vriend Kali Skuman het vir ons geleer van die Stockdale paradox. The Stockdale paradox dictates that we need to face the brutal facts. And Voskor needs to face the brutal facts. You are a strategic resource, you are a strategic partner, and the industry is reaching out to you. We can make this work, we can find solutions. Just come to the table. I ask you that. I thank you all for your participation.